we're going to talk about disruptive innovation, the future of work. And boy, this is an exciting time. And you all know that. You don't need someone like me to tell you that, of course. But really interesting things that are going on. And for me, I cover technology. I do maybe 40 or 50 events a year. And they're all over the place. And they always intersect with different industries or different parts of the world. Or some are governments, the majority is corporate. So the thing I love most about what I do is I get this exposure to all of this different, these different circumstances. And one of the things I like most about this audience is because from what I understand, there's a whole bunch of different businesses represented here. And I love that because we can talk broadly about the trends that are happening, knowing that every one of you are likely going to have different ideas of how you can implement that in your own industry and in your own business. So in any case, as I mentioned, I do cover technology. That's kind of my primary focus. And of course, that's an exploding field. So I'm not going to bore you today, I promise, with a whole bunch of charts. But I do want to show you a couple. And I'm going to start with this one here. And what we're talking about is the cost of storing 1 terabyte of data. Okay? And I know this is simple stuff, but I want you to just to see the scale of what I'm referring to. We've heard these sorts of analogies a million times, but it's really fascinating. So in 2020, the cost of storing 1 terabyte of data was approximately $17,000. So does anyone want to hazard a guess of what we're expected to pay for the same thing in 2 years? Just yell it out, or 1 year. What was that? 300. Anyone else? 3. Who said that? That is the right answer. That is the right answer. $3. And this is, I mean, seriously, like, again, I know you've heard it before, but this is unbelievable. Like, what's happening here is unbelievable. And it truly is part of, and by the way, it's not just data storage. It's data bandwidth, data processing, and data storage. All three. Those are the 3 pillars of technology, right? Is data processing, data storage, data bandwidth. That's the spine of the technology industry, right? And all 3 of them are going through this exponential curve where they're, and everyone, see, when people look at these exponential curves, they always think about how it goes up and to the right, which it does, of course. But the inverse of that is that the cost of any one technology goes down to the floor, right? It's like it approaches free. I mean, it doesn't quite get there, but it's pretty darn close. And so when you think, I mean, this exponential, we'll talk about it in a second, but, we're human beings. We are hardwired to think in linear terms. So you have to really coach yourself. I do it myself. I'm always like, no, what if it was 10 times as powerful as it is today? Or better yet, think about the most advanced technology that you're implementing in your business today. What if that technology was 1/10 the cost of what you're paying for it? How many of your competitors would be doing the same thing if it was 1/10 what you're paying? So and that's how you think exponentially, right? But this collapse in the cost structure of data is driving the whole thing. And you get like the Internet of Things, right? Some people call that, machine to machine. There's estimates now we're going to have over 50 billion devices connected through the Internet by 2020. It's incredible because once 5G rolls out, 5G is coming, the mobile, 4G is what we all have now on our phones. So 5G, it's going to allow a little plastic sensor, to get power from a Wi-Fi network. So it doesn't even need a cord to be connected to anything. You just stick it on the wall wherever you want. It's got enough power to measure whatever it's measuring and send the signal to some sort of a unit that can pick it up. So imagine, and these sensors could be a quarter, 25 cents each, or even less. So you can imagine the explosion of sensors we're going to have just in the next 5 to 10 years. Like the IoT, we are just getting started, right? And so one of the early winners of the kind of big data revolution with all this new data being collected was predictive maintenance. So you could actually, for example, you could put sensors for, say, heat and vibration on a machine. And with those 2 sensors, you can anticipate when that machine's going to go down and fix it ahead of schedule, right? Rather than waiting for the line to come to a stop unexpectedly, and all of a sudden you got to shut everything down to try and fix the machine. So that was one of the early applications, right? And every innovation, there's always going to be early winners. We'll talk about some others, like in artificial intelligence. But with the predictive maintenance, we've seen huge applications, of course, in manufacturing and in mining. In fact, the mining stuff, guys, is so cool. So they put sensors on the drill bits themselves. So while they're drilling, in real time, they're mapping their because they sense the heat and the pressure and everything. So they're dynamically mapping, geological mapping underneath the ground while they're drilling, and they can change directions to optimize the drill. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It's happening today. And so, of course, we've seen applications in oil and gas. One of the most interesting areas to follow is what they call facilities management. So just a room like this is an unbelievable facility. So the thing probably has 200 sensors, measuring different things in different parts of the room. One of the best examples of that today is the complex going up in New York called Hudson Yards. 19 skyscrapers. They just had a big opening. Some of you guys are nodding. Really cool what they're doing there. Incredible. They built it on top of a rail yard and never shut the rail yard down while they were building. And some of those buildings are like 90 stories tall. Imagine to try and build those buildings on top of a rail yard with that kind of anchoring required. But anyway, it's going to be the most censored residential environment in the world when it opens 2021. But of course, that won't last long because there's a million other projects in other parts of the world that have even more, right? Just because we're on that progression. And all the data is being aggregated onto the smart grid. Probably one of the best examples of that is in Singapore, doing some really cool stuff. But we're seeing smart city developments happening all over the world. All over the world. So we truly are in the middle of this exponential environment. So here's where I want to talk a little bit about this because, what I'm trying to do is kind of create a foundation for the conversation, right? And so these things, again, I know you've heard many of these things before in one context or another, but it's so important just to kind of lay the foundation. And exponential thinking is something that is really, there's a lot of books being written about this right now, actually. It's not easy to do. It seems not possible. The numbers get too big too fast once you project out far enough. Like you're okay for 4 or 5, 6 iterations, but once you get past that, the numbers are going up so high, it's like, this can't possibly be true. And meanwhile, it actually is happening that way, right? So one of the best examples of exponential progress, in the recent time, and again, I know you've heard the story, but it's the Human Genome Project, right? And so check this out, it's fascinating. The Human Genome Project started in 1990. That's when they started the project. And 7 years later, they had only completed 1%. And so all the pundits come out, on the evening news, and they're like, my gosh, we're going to need 700 more years. It takes 7 years to do 1%. Like, you just do the math. It's going to take a long time. And of course, that's not what happened. And there's some people who really do think, in an exponential way. Probably the best example is Ray Kurzweil. Probably a few of you follow Ray Kurzweil. Works for Google today. Really interesting guy. Anyway, he said, so check this out. He said, if we're at 1%, we're almost done. How is that possible? He said, if we're at 1%, we're halfway there. Because if it's scaling, so if it's scaling at 100% per year, right, which means it's going twice as much every year, the speed is doubling, okay? How many years does it take to get from 1% to 100? It's only 6.5. The first year it goes 1 to 2, second year to 4, 8, 16, 32, that's 5 years. 64 is the 6th year. 7th year, you're over the top. How's that possible? Like, how's that possible? Right now, solar energy is accounting for about 1% of total energy production. Now, it's not scaling at 100% per year, to be clear, but it's incredible what these things can actually happen. And that's exactly how it played out. They actually finished it. And this is actually a little bit ahead of schedule, which means it was scaling at a little bit more than 100% per year. Right? But that's how fast these things can happen. If we're at 1%, we're almost done. If we're at 1%, we're almost done. That's crazy, but it's happening. And the reason this whole disruptive innovation conversation is becoming so prevalent everywhere, you can't turn around without someone talking about disruptive innovation, is because technology evolves along an exponential curve, and all these businesses are getting caught off guard. Right? Because it goes from nothing, like you can't even see the business, and all of a sudden it's taking over your entire industry in what seems like the blink of an eye. So we're seeing this all over the place. These are propagation curves of various technologies over the last 100 years. And you can see that it's kind of going from 0 to, let's say, 80%. 80% is generally accepted as being full adoption. But the lines are getting steeper and steeper. So these new technologies are going from 0 to 80 in record time, and that's affecting business. This is a crazy study that came out of Washington University, and this is like scary even. 40% of S&P 500 companies will no longer exist by 2026. Wow, that's incredible, right? Is that possible? Could that happen? And what happens is, like all these, okay, this is all I do. I get like 90% of my income is speaking fees, so I'm always going to different conferences. And it doesn't matter where you are, any industry, different parts of the world, generally two things are always the same. Number one, everyone says they're behind. In every industry, they're like, oh, we're really behind. And it's not everyone's behind, because guess what? Things are going really, really quick. Like I do this full time and I'm behind. So everyone's behind. Number two, right? I mean, you can't keep up, right? Number two, the executives are terrified. I mean, if you really peel back the layers of the onion, people are really nervous because of this, right? And so they take a defensive posture, right? They're like, who's going to eat our lunch? That's what they're worried about. They're worried that someone's going to come along and take their revenue stream away. And my feeling is that that is exactly the wrong, it's like literally the opposite approach of what I think. Because if 40% of the businesses are gone, like who's going to take their place? It's not like the economy is going to disappear. The economy is going to stay there, right? So if these big companies fail, someone's going to come in and fill that void with a better solution, right? So I think you should be saying, who else's lunch can we eat? Like, and I know that's a cheesy metaphor, okay, but it's true, right? Like, why can't we just look for new revenue opportunities if we know that like everyone's on shaky ground? Why can't we just expect that and stay on offense and try and figure out how we can capture some of that business and bring it into our own companies, right? And that's really the majority of my work is doing stuff like that, doing strategy sessions to help people look for that. So what I invite you to do, it's a short session that I have, but I invite you just to kind of take a step back and forget about maybe the specific business that you run or that you contribute to or the role you have. Everyone's got milestones and deadlines. I'm sure you all are very busy, but just for 40 minutes or so, 30 minutes, just let me tell you about some of the, because I study this stuff all the time and I'm a total nerd and I'm a geek and I love this stuff. So let me tell you about some of the things that I'm finding out about and some of the trends that are really accelerating. And I'd like to start with a quick story. Just out of curiosity, does anyone here recognize either of these two people? Wow, okay, just a couple of you. Okay, so we'll start with the guy on the left. His name is Brian Acton. And in 2009, Brian Acton was looking for work in the Bay Area. And he applied to work at both Twitter and Facebook, and they both turned him down. So, and if you've been following, I've been following this guy for a long time, and he's actually a really nice guy. He's a gracious guy. So anyway, at the time, he wrote a tweet about it. Here's the tweet. It said, Facebook turned me down. It's a great opportunity to connect with some fantastic people. Looking forward to life's next adventure. And what might that be? Well, he got together with a friend of his and started WhatsApp, which they grew over the course of 5 years and sold to none other than Facebook for a cool $19 billion. So, I'm bitter. I admit it. I'm 48. He's a lot younger than I am. It's a lot of money. Anyway, so again, the pundits come out, of course, on the evening news, and they start analyzing. And this was a record-breaking transaction. It was not a common transaction, right? But anyway, there's a few different ways you can look at it. One way is that at the time of the sale, WhatsApp had 55 employees. So by that measure, Facebook paid $345 million per employee. That's amazing. Right? In other ways, at the time of the sale, they had approximately 450 million active monthly users. So by that measure, they paid $42 per user. Either way, it's an awful lot of money. But maybe the best way to look at a transaction like this is that 5 years, right? Like 5 years ago was 2014. Like to me, that feels like yesterday. Like it's incredible. This is not a long time. Over the course of 5 years, 55 employees managed to engage over 450 million active monthly users in 5 years. How many people are here? Like 250 or something? Like 55 employees, just like a group that big, builds something that touches the lives of 500 million people, right? And that speaks to the leverage that's in the system. So anytime you see a speaker in any conference, whatever, he or she always has like a couple of key messages that they're hoping you're going to walk away with. And spoiler alert, this is one of mine, okay? Because there's more and more leverage in the system all the time. Like every year, there's more leverage in different facets of the world, finances and so on. But the 900-pound elephant in the room is technology. And technology is a form of leverage. Like the whole, the division between rich and poor, right? Number one, that's true, right? It's widening like really quickly right now, which is to some extent a mathematical imperative. But it's also a function of this leverage. Right? So in other words, some people are on the right side of the leverage equation. So they're leveraging technology, right? And for the most part, they're doing really well. But there's a whole bunch of people and a lot of businesses that are they're on the wrong side of the leverage equation. So they're being leveraged by technology that someone else is controlling. And for them, it's harder and harder every year to get the same results they had last year. Right? And that's very true. That dynamic's playing out all the time. But as business leaders, like the responsibility is on us to make sure we're on the right side of the leverage equation, which means what? It means we have to run towards the changes. We have to run towards the technology. It means we have to try the technology and try to implement it despite the fact that it might fail. Right? Innovation can be summarized in one concept, budgeting failure. Like you have to try something new. Jeff Bezos, that guy is genius. If you know it's going to work, it's not an experiment. Like that's brilliant. And it's so bloody simple, right? Like it's just another one. So that guy, I'm telling you, Jeff, you might like him or hate him, but he's seriously brilliant. If you had how does this work? If you had a 10% chance for a 100x return, you would take that bet every day. You'll still fail 90% of the time. That's insanity. Seriously, think about it. It's a mathematical imperative. It's a mathematical no-brainer. Take the bet. You're still going to fail 90%. Anyway, it's crazy. So that's what innovation is. We have to try new things. We have to try new technologies, knowing it might not work, right? That's the challenge of it, is having the guts to do that, right? So there's all kinds of different forms of technology-based leverage, right? Including software. Software is a form of leverage, right? You can leverage software. Right? The cloud is a form of leverage. You can leverage the cloud. You can leverage mobile technology. Increasingly, you can leverage wearable technology. Really cool stuff that's coming out right now. Right? Really wild. And of course, virtual reality is kind of right around the corner. Microsoft just got a $400 million order for augmented reality headsets for the military. That's a major, major indicator. That is, we're finally turning the corner. Sooner or later, we're going to see a broad market adoption headset. When that happens, everything changes. A lot of things change. Sooner or later, some 13-year-old kid on some YouTube star is going to be photographed wearing one of these things walking down the street, and then everyone will buy one, and it'll happen, right? That's probably what will happen. Anyway, and there's training applications, so it's not just video games, right? We see robotics coming up. This is Baxter. The price comes down every year. Capabilities go up. We're seeing robots showing up in hotels, concierge services. We're seeing security robots in shopping malls. We're seeing information robots in airports, right? And those are leading innovators right there. So you can model these things to see the future, right? So hotels and shopping malls and hospitals and stadiums, these are places that have a huge amount of people, and so they have a financial incentive to adopt the new technology sooner. So you can see what they're doing in airports or what they're doing in a shopping mall and anticipate what's probably going to happen in smaller stores later and maybe eventually in our homes, right? There's a propagation curve. You can follow these propagation curves and get a clear idea of what's coming down the pipe. But they're all examples of leverage, right? People are leveraging these technologies. So there's really, I don't mean to talk so fast, it's because I've got a ton of stuff I'm going to pack into this. So I just want to try and get through a lot of content. But I want to cover really two things in a bit more detail. The first one is artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is everywhere right now. And the second is blockchain technology. So, and I'm going to touch on both, but let's start with machine learning. So, and people say, like, what constitutes artificial intelligence? Because a lot of it is just good analytics. It's just a good algorithm. Like, is it really artificial intelligence? Not necessarily. So, what's required for it to be considered artificial intelligence? Well, there's really two things, and the first is that it implies some sort of human-level comprehension, right? And the second, which is more important, is that it has an ability to learn. It has to have an ability to learn. That's the essence of artificial intelligence. So the early winner, right, the early winner of big data was predictive maintenance. Early winner of artificial intelligence was these recommendation engines, right? So you go to Amazon or some website and it recommends different products, or if you're watching movies on Netflix, it's giving a recommendation of what you might like. And if you're listening to Pandora, it's the same thing. But that's actually already kind of old news. Like it kind of started, 8-9 years ago. So it's kind of, it's not a huge deal anymore. So what's happening right now? Well, there's another one that's propagating right now, which is, did I just skip over a slide? Yeah, right here. Natural language processing. So this is, so it is, I'll go ahead here. So it is the Siri on Apple, right? And then, of course, the Google phone has this as well. And then you've got Amazon Alexa and Google introduced their Google Home as well. Just out of curiosity, how many of you, and don't put your hands up for me, but for everyone else to see, how many of you have either Amazon Alexa or Google Home in your homes right now? Take a look around. Holy smoke. Yeah, it's probably 30%, maybe 25, 30%. Right? And you wait, like in 2-3 years, it's just going to become ubiquitous. In fact, I was in a hotel the other day, and they had an Alexa in the hotel room. It was a Hilton. And I could say, like, close the curtains, and it closed the curtains. It was wild. But anyway, where is the application of this technology? Where's the financial incentive? Well, it's turning the corner right now. Like, it's hard for natural language processing is referred to quite often as NLP. So with NLP, the problem is, like with Alexa, I can say, Alexa, what's the temperature outside? And she'll say it's, 67 degrees. But if I then say, will it be warmer tomorrow? Now she's stumped, right? I have to stop and say, Alexa, will it be warmer tomorrow than today? Now she can do it, right? And if you want her to try the social bot to actually continue adding context, you can say, Alexa, let's chat. And then they'll turn it on, and she'll try to add context as you go along. It's really, and it's clunky. It's not that good yet. But guys, it's turning the corner right now, right? And so you have these companies that have hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of people in a call center. Imagine the HR nightmare. I'm sure some of you have huge call centers that you manage. What a nightmare to hire these people and people calling in sick and training and trying to get consistent protocol delivery. It's a disaster, right? Meanwhile, you can have a computer, and this is like 2-3 years away. Like, we're right there. We're right there. And the computer will be more consistent, and believe me, the young kids, let's say people whose ages start with a 2 or a 3, right? My age starts with a 4, okay? They'd rather talk to a computer than a person, right? I mean, the older people, we want to talk to a person, right? We want to be driven by a person, not the young kids. They're like, I'd rather give me the machine. So, and there are 3 million people in this country alone in call centers. Imagine the financial incentive to implement this. It's huge. The cost savings is enormous. And meanwhile, you can split test, you can optimize conversations, the whole thing. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. So that's definitely going to happen, right? Another area is image and object recognition, right? Including things like facial recognition and so on. But when it comes to stuff like this, it's being used a lot in advanced manufacturing. And of course, this is a critical piece to the autonomous driving deal. So let's talk about that, because that's coming way faster than people think. Way faster than people think. So what's the most complicated place to drive? Right in the middle of the city. City driving is the most complex, right? So who's in the lead? Well, most people would say that Google's Waymo is in the lead. They've got like 600 cars out there. They've got 10 million miles driven and something like 7 billion virtual miles driven. But at the end of the day, they've got, roughly 10 million miles driven. But Tesla has data on over 1 billion miles. They got almost 500,000 cars on the road with the sensors. So whether people are using the autopilot or not, the car is collecting data. They're just stockpiling all this insane data. So they've got a huge advantage. Uber is collecting a whole ton of data. They're making a big play. right? That's where this is going, by the way. Transport as a service. I mean, Uber, 75% of the cost is the salary of the driver. So you can drop the price by 2/3 and still have more profits if you can do it autonomously, right? And you know that Uber's going to take Wall Street money and buy 100,000 cars in a day. So it's not going to be people buying these cars, it's going to be fleets, which is also going to screw up the insurance industry because you're going to have enterprise fleet insurance rather than individual insurance. It's a totally different game. Like, it changes so many things. Anyway, in California, you've got Didi, which is the equivalent of Uber in China, right? So these are kind of the leaders in the city driving space. I'm guessing that's going to deploy 2022-ish, maybe 2023. But what has less obstacles than city driving? Well, freeways, right? Freeways have fewer obstacles than city driving. So that's going to deploy first. Right? It makes sense. It's going to deploy first. It's easier to do, right? Hub to hub, long haul trucking. So we had the test, the proof of concept, the POC, that happened last summer with Otto. This is a company that was purchased by Uber. They ran this thing 125 miles down the freeway to Colorado Springs. There was a guy in the cab, but he wasn't driving. Payload was 50,000 cans of Budweiser. It got there on time. So funny. Anyway, so I mean, Mercedes is coming out with their autonomous truck, right? And the bottom line is, if you don't need a driver, you don't need a cab. So here's the Volvo version. This is unbelievable, right? So this is the kind of stuff that's happening, right? And I would bet that some state in this union, I don't know which one, but some state will legalize long-haul, hub-to-hub, long-haul trucking in their state, maybe by the end of this year. Like, we're very close. If not this year, certainly next year. In some state, maybe Texas, who knows? I have no idea. But what has fewer obstacles than freeway driving? Agricultural land, right? This is happening today. This is already done, right? And this thing, look at this. This thing's badass. I mean, no joke, I would love to buy one of these myself. Look at that. Look at the wheels. Look at the wheels on it. Like, I would love to own that. It's crazy. And where else? Right? In the mining operations, right? This is happening today. They've got autonomous trucks that do the whole deal, right? So that legislation's already been passed. We're good to go. So again, you can see the propagation curve. It's already done in mining and agricultural land. I think 12 months from now, someone's going to start with the hub-to-hub long-haul trucking, and maybe we got 3-4 years before we hit city streets. And the propagation will be quick. So at the end of the day, what we're really waiting for is just the regulatory approval. And they still have work to do. I mean, it's not like the algorithms are ready to go, but you can measure the progress, and it's getting close, right? It's getting very close. Well, there's 3.5 million commercial drivers in this country. 3.5 million commercial drivers. It's incredible. Right now, before we go on to the next example, how do they learn? And this is key. So, and I talked about this with a few the folks here. We went out for dinner last night, which was awesome, and I talked about this same case history. So there's a guy lives in the Santa Cruz Hills, and he owns a Tesla. And when the autopilot was released, the hardware was already on the cars, so it was just a software upgrade, and it was ready to go. Anyway, he was driving home one day, and on the way to his home in the Santa Cruz Hills is a very tight corner. So, and this isn't it. I just bought this image, but there's a tight corner on the way to his house. Okay. Anyway, and that first day, he drove towards that corner and took his hands off the wheel and was like, "All right, let's see what you got." That takes balls. I'm not sure I would have done it. Anyway, so the car, it didn't crash, okay, but like it veered out of the lane, and of course the brakes came on very hard, and the warning to take, so it was essentially a fail. But then the next day, he did it again, and then he did it again, and again, and again. And in 2 weeks, the car knew how to take the corner. But it wasn't just his car that knew how to take the corner. It was every Tesla. Guys, does this make sense? This is so key. This is like The most important, they call it fleet learning. If you go down to Sand Hill Road in the Bay Area, down by Palo Alto, that's like the VC capital, they're all talking about fleet learning and network effects, and that's the genius of the cloud, guys, because if you can take the individual experience from people on the network and upload their experience to the cloud, where the true intelligence is up here, then you can deploy those improvements across the whole network. Right, so you have a better driving experience as a result of something that someone else experienced. Does that make sense? That's why it's accelerating. Like, that's why this whole thing, that's what exponential is. Like, it's happening so quickly, right? So we're part of this situation where these network effects, this fleet learning capability, this cloud capability, which allows for that, is driving this forward, right, at a really, really quick rate. So, and we see like all sorts of applications of this kind of stuff. I'm sure a lot of you have been following the RPA, the robotic process automation, which is going on. Probably the best example of this that I've seen was the trading floor in Connecticut, UBS trading floor, 2005, and this is 2016. They're all gone. They're all gone. Why? Because all of that's being done by algorithms today. Right? And there was a study that came out of Oxford a couple of years ago that looked at all sorts of countries around the world. They said that 47% of the jobs in the United States are likely to be displaced by automation in the next 10 to 15 years. And that number was actually lower than some of the developing countries like China at 77%, India at 69%. Unbelievable. Right? And so there's all sorts of models of which jobs are most likely to be affected. This is just one of them, so this is not the only one. You can do a Google search and find 100 others. But you can get an idea of some of the jobs that are most likely to be displaced. Right? Number one on the list is loan officers. And, we all know probably about Rocket Mortgage, which is leveraging the automated underwriting platforms that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac first rolled out in 2003. Right? And now that's gone full circle. Now it's ready for retail. Right? Last year, in March, just a little bit over a year ago, China opened their first personless bank. There's no one who works there. It's just it's a building, and at 8:30 in the morning, the doors unlock and the lights come on. You can go in and do stuff, but there's nobody there. It's crazy. Right? If you have a problem, you can call. Right? And of course, Amazon has opened their Go stores up in Seattle. Right? They want to open 3,000 more of them around the country. There's 3.4 million retail cashiers in this country. So just in those three areas, right, just in those three examples, we've got 3 million people in call centers. We've got 3.5 million commercial drivers. We've got 3.4 retail cashiers, 9.9 million people. It's a lot of people that are likely to lose their jobs. And there's a lot of models that allow us to kind of conceptualize mentally what that will look like. This is just one of many. But it looks at kind of the economy more generally, and there's always exceptions when you do models like this, so it's not 100%. But basically, you can look at the jobs that we have out there and put them in one of two buckets, right? You either have manual jobs, right, or you have cognitive jobs. One of the two. Oh, did I lose it? There it goes. And in each one of those buckets, you've got repetitive tasks and you have non-repetitive tasks. So it's reasonable that at some point, the repetitive manual jobs are going to get replaced by robotics at some point, right? And it's also reasonable to assume that the repetitive cognitive jobs get replaced by algorithms, right? We don't know exactly when, but the point is it's easier to find something when you know what you're looking for. Right? It's so easy for us all to sit down and write down a list of like the repetitive tasks, either in our own jobs or of the people we employ or the other people in the team, on the company. You can very easily write down all those examples and have a list, and so then it's easier to find, okay, let's look for areas where we can automate. And then the non-repetitive tasks, you end up with essentially agile humans and creative humans is really what it boils down to. But that study from Oxford suggests that roughly 47% of the tasks in our economy are essentially repetitive, right? So what are the skills we need for the future, right? Knowing all this, right, we've talked kind of about the downside. Well, on the upside, the skills that people need really boil down into one of two categories. And the first one is, complex problem solving and cognitive flexibility and all this sort of stuff, critical thinking, and then on the bottom you've got all the people stuff. So at the end of the day, it's basically creativity and relationships. Those are the skills that are going to be most valued in the future. Now, where are the new jobs going to come from? That one's trickier, because there's no question there's going to be a lot of jobs lost. Well, what are the new business opportunities? Well, you can think about that in a lot of different ways. And again, I always look for models, like how can we model how this might play out? And it might follow, I don't know this for sure, but it might essentially follow the Maslow's hierarchy of needs model. So the first businesses out there were satisfying that first layer of physiological needs, right? Food and so on, shelter, right? And then as the economy grows and we get more productive, we start having businesses in the safety area. Arguably, the whole social media is in that third category for love and belonging, right? That effectively is social media is in that kind of space. And now, in the higher echelons, we have things like business coaches or life coaches and massage therapists and healers and all these. These are all, and that never existed, 30 years ago, or at least was very, very rare. And today it's more and more common. So we can expect that probably new businesses will start to climb that ladder and satisfy higher things because the bottom ones are already so saturated. Now, there might be some disruption opportunities down there where you can take a process and replace it with an entirely better process. But as far as new business models are concerned, I would expect them to probably be higher up on those Maslow's hierarchy of needs. One model, right? Another model you can look at is the whole do it yourself, do it with you, done for you model, right? So the one where you don't get any help at all, it's like do it yourself. The second one is we'll help you do it, right? And the third one is just pay us and we'll do it for you and just deliver the results. So again, we can expect the new business models to go higher up that ladder. So as a general rule, we're trending towards higher levels of service, right, in kind of any area. It's always going to be higher. Like now you've got DoorDash, right, and Uber Eats. Like you can literally just make a phone call. Someone else will cook it. Someone else will deliver it. All you have to do is eat it, right? Like it's a higher and higher level of service. So we're seeing going in that direction. So let's get back on track. So I want to also refer briefly to blockchain. And again, I know I'm packing in a lot, but this doesn't need to be that complicated, and that's why I wanted to include it, because I think a lot of people make it more complicated than it needs to be. So for anyone who doesn't know, blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin. I'm not going to talk about Bitcoin today, although it's going up in value. Just right now, it's up 100% so far this year. But let's talk structurally about blockchain. So in the simplest analysis, imagine an Excel spreadsheet with a whole bunch of transactions listed on it. But instead of that spreadsheet being on one server, one computer, it's actually on hundreds or thousands of different computers simultaneously, and all those computers, they're called nodes, they have to agree through a consensus mechanism that they all have the latest, most up-to-date version, right? So that consensus process makes it really difficult to hack, because you can't just hack one computer and get away with it. It would immediately show that that's been tampered with. So you would have to hack 51% of all the nodes at exactly the same time, in exactly the same way, with exactly the same result in order for it to work, right? Makes it very, very difficult to do, right? And by the way, no one has ever hacked the Bitcoin blockchain. They've hacked into exchanges and wallets, but no one's ever hacked, and everybody's tried. Believe me, it's a lot of money. Everyone's tried, and they have not. And it's because of this consensus, this diversified consensus mechanism. But it gets even better than that. It's because, and here's the essence of blockchain. Because every time you add a new block, every time you add a new block to the chain of previous blocks, right, of the latest transactions, the newest block has a summary of the previous block inside of it, which means that every time something is put on a blockchain, you can never take it off, you can never change it, because if you did, you would have to hack every subsequent block in 51% of the nodes at the same time, same way, all success. It's never been done, right? So essentially, it's a distributed ledger, nothing more than that. But it's a software architecture which makes it essentially tamper-resistant. So effectively, blockchain automates trust. It doesn't require a person. It's just the way it's organized, it automates trust, right? So where are the applications for that? Well, again, the early winner, right? The early winner in the blockchain space was in supply chain management. So there was a proof of concept early last year, that involved 88 bales of cotton. Which were produced in Texas, and they shipped it all the way to China, and all the details of that order were included in what's called a smart contract, which was uploaded to a private Ethereum blockchain, right? And once the goods actually arrived in China and the barcodes were scanned, that automatically transferred ownership and released payment. All happened automatically. So if you want to understand what a smart contract is, it's basically just a contract that has if-then statements built into it. Right, so it's essentially a decision tree. So if you get to here, if this happens, go there. If it doesn't happen, go here and there. There's another choice and choices, and the whole thing's mapped out. It's just it's a piece of software that just says all the different possible permutations, right? And so once it's up there, it just executes itself. So you can imagine wills and contracts that execute themselves. That's effectively what a smart contract is. But the early winner was in the supply chain. Because imagine that transaction, the cotton thing. So you got the producer in Texas, you got a trucker to get it to the port, you have a loader, that's a different company, and there's customs clearance there, and then you're on the boat, that probably has a dozen companies involved one way or another. And then on the other side, you have an offload, you have customs, and you've got another trucker, and then the final. So these transactions quite often include like 20, 25 companies. And every one of those companies has order entry, and tracking, and project management, right? And afterwards, you got audit and compliance. Those are salaries. Those are all salaries, right? And every single one of those 20 companies has those salaries. And so it's all baked into the pricing a million times over, and it all gets translated into the final cost of shipping, right? So there's a huge incentive to put this thing on a blockchain because you can eliminate all of that and still have trust. You can do business with someone you don't trust and be safe. Right? So imagine all the different players in that particular transaction. If you upload a smart contract, which includes all those permutations, right, then they're effectively connected. Once they approve it through that consensus mechanism, they're connected on the blockchain. And if you pay for the order using a cryptocurrency, you can eliminate the banks altogether. Imagine. So crazy. And it goes into every industry, right? If you're in the automobile industry, you can have all the players in that business connected through a private blockchain to allow this to go through quicker. If you're in the real estate industry, you can have all the players of the real estate business connected through a blockchain. It makes things a lot easier. There's a lot of money to be saved. There's a financial incentive, right? So, and there's also a traceability factor because you have all those people checking in along the way to say, yes, it's now in the boat. Yes, it's gone this far. Yes, it's here. Yes, it's there, right? And so the traceability side is very strong. And this is a startup that started actually to track diamonds originally, the whole blood diamond thing. So they're tracking diamonds from the mine to the retail shelf and using a blockchain that's transparent. And it worked so well that now they're doing the same thing for pharmaceutical medication, and they're doing the same thing for GMO foods. Right? So the whole track and trace piece is enormous, and the level of service, people talk about the Amazon effect, where people have a higher and higher expectation of service from companies because what they see Amazon doing. Blockchain can allow that in a B2B space, that same kind of track and trace and global logistics, right? It can be used to keep track of title ownership and land property ownership in different parts of the world. This is from Colombia, when they were negotiating with the FARC rebels. There's a whole story there, but it's an application for blockchain there. Title insurance is something that could be easily replaced by a blockchain-based system because it eliminates that possibility, and you can keep track of educational certifications and degrees and so on. And there's even, this was a collaboration between Accenture and Microsoft to give digital identity to refugees, mainly the Syrian refugees. So with nothing more than a cell phone, they could prove who they were and where they came from. Biometric database, really fascinating, right? So these are really interesting, and there's a lot of opportunity there for disruptive innovation. And so just to let you know where we're at, this is the last section. It's kind of a little module. I want to talk about disruptive innovation, maybe 8 minutes, and then I've got like a few slides right at the end, maybe another 4 minutes after that, and then we're done. So think about questions, right? If you have questions, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. I'm also going to be back at the end of the event, more like 11:30, and so if we don't get to some questions now, we can do them later, but I just wanted to let you know where we're at. But disruptive innovation, so there's two types of innovation. There's incremental innovation and disruptive innovation, right? And incremental innovation comes from the center of expertise, right? So from the scientists and the experts and the people optimizing stuff, making things a little bit better year after year, and it's incredibly powerful. Like, it's transforming our world. We're optimizing our world with incremental innovation, but that's not what we're talking about here. Disruptive innovation invalidates existing business models. Like, it takes the whole business model and says, sorry, we don't need... So, okay. Who developed the digital camera? Kodak. Kodak, the very company that got wiped out by digital cameras. Imagine. Like, and these are smart people. They are smart people, and they developed a digital camera, and they're like, that's a piece of garbage. No one's going to want it. We're sticking with film. Like, that's how this stuff happens. And it wiped out their entire business model. The business model is gone. Like, that's disruptive innovation. So you have these obvious examples, right? Apple disrupted the music business, right? Then they also disrupted the phone business, right? And then, of course, Google disrupted the phone business as well. Well, what do these have in common, right? Disruptive innovation comes from what I refer to as adjacent markets, right? They don't come from the center of expertise. They come from the sides. Like, what's an adjacent market? Think about what's your biggest supplier? Who else do they sell to? That's an adjacent market. Right? Who's your biggest customer? Who else do they buy from? That's an adjacent market, right? They're related, they're not the same, but they have overlaps, right? So you have these different industries that kind of function autonomously. They're their own industry, but they overlap in places. The disruptive innovation comes from those overlaps, right? Which is the side from any one perspective within any one industry, right? So that's why people get caught off guard. So, and you get a ton of examples, like Facebook. This is mostly in technology, but Facebook disrupted the SMS business, right? It's an adjacent market. Of course, that's what WhatsApp did. That's what Snapchat is doing, right? LinkedIn totally disrupted the recruiting business. Different business. It was an adjacent market, right? Now, Amazon disrupted the book business. That's an adjacent market for them. Right? Uber Eats, like we talked about before. Can you imagine food delivery from Uber? Like, it's so crazy. That's an adjacent market. Now Amazon's doing grocery, right? We've got Tesla and Google getting into the car business, right? Those are adjacent markets. Right now Facebook's trying to get into the ISP business with these guys. These planes, they're solar-powered planes. They fly at 70,000 feet. They can be up there for months at a time, circling. They're solar powered. They just keep going, delivering internet to the people below. And Google's in a race to try and do the same thing using their balloons. Unbelievable, right? So these are adjacent markets. Disruptive innovation comes from the edges, right? So a classic example, like the fringe, right? What's the crazy, the part of the industry that no one takes seriously? So what's the cutting edge? What's the cutting edge of nutritional supplements? Where's the bleeding edge of nutritional supplements? It's in horse racing. That's where they test the latest supplements. And it makes sense, right? It's less regulated. You got $1 million on a horse. He's not quite good enough to win. You'll try anything to see if it'll work, right? That's where they tested creatine. I take creatine. Some of you probably take creatine. That came from horse racing first, right? That's where they tested D3. That's where they tested the impact of zinc loading on testosterone. All of that started in horse racing. And then when it gained traction there, it comes into the mainstream, right? What's the bleeding edge of online marketing? Guys, it's in porn, right? It's in online gambling, right? That's the place where they test the latest wireframes and lead magnets, conversion funnels. That starts in those crazy sites that no one wants to look at. You get my point. You get my point. That's where it starts. You have to be willing to look on those the crazy. Look at the crazy. That's what I do all day. Is I'm constantly not the porn. Can you imagine? I work at home. Anyway, no, but I'm always looking for those crazy applications. Like, where's the weird, the people the stuff that people laugh at? That's where it comes from. That's where disruptive innovation comes from. It comes from those places that you don't expect. And I'll give you one more, and then we'll finish up. I just have a few slides here at the end, but this is another classic. These models are thought experiments. They're so powerful. So disruptive innovation tends to, on average, it tends to cater to the least profitable market segment first. Right? Think about who's your who are the customers you hate? Oh, I hate those. They don't have any money. They're a pain in the neck. I'd be happy if those customers were gone entirely. We've all got them. We've all got those customers. That's where the disruptive, what do those people want? I'll tell you what they want. They want a simpler, less expensive solution. That's what they want, right? But meanwhile, what do we all do, right? We all cater to the most profitable market segment first, which are the folks at the top. And it makes perfect sense. That's where the money is, right? Premium products. What's your upsell? What's the full service package? Like, done for you. That's the whole thing. There's a ton of money. And it's true in every single industry. So you have this pervasive upward push where every industry is constantly pushing into the premium side of their particular market segment. And who gets left behind? It's the people at the bottom, right? Like, that's where it starts. So I do these strategy sessions with these companies, and I always tell them to look up, look down, look side to side, right? Look up. That's where there's money up there. There's good money. You need those margins because innovation requires budgeting failure. Where are you going to get that money from? You're going to get it from selling premium products. You need those margins. You need that gross profit, right? At the same time, look down. That's where disruptive innovation comes from. Spend one Friday a month or every 2 weeks asking some of those strategic questions and keeping an eye on that bottom end of the market. What's going on down there? And then look side to side. Those are those new market, or those are those new revenue opportunities. Those are those adjacent markets, right? Who else's lunch can you eat? And if you do that, you can stay in front of it. You can capitalize on this stuff. You can actually stay ahead, right? Rather than always having to play catch up. You can stay on offense, right? So that's really my challenge to you, is to think about artificial intelligence and robotic process and automation and all these different opportunities. And can we use blockchain? Blockchain, by definition, is an ecosystem play. So you have to collaborate with your competitors and your customers to create a blockchain that makes sense, right? But it might make sense for you. And can you train the people that you do have on the skills of the future so that they're ready for the things that are going to be coming down the pipe? So my message really this morning is just to think way bigger about what's possible. Think way bigger, because there's some things you can take for granted when you think bigger like that. And the first is that you end up inspiring everyone around you. Like, they love it when you inspire your employees, when you inspire your customers when you're thinking. In fact, you inspire your competitors when you're thinking big. Like, you inspire the whole thing. And the second thing is, if you're really doing something big, something that people haven't tried, quite often you have no competition along the way because no one else has the courage to try it, right? And so there's a lot of people who are like poster children for this type of thinking. We've all seen these people before. I love some of these, Richard Branson. I love quotes. I literally buy books of quotes. And he has like dozens of awesome quotes. So here's my favorite Richard Branson quote. The fastest way to become a millionaire is to start out as a billionaire and then start an airline. That's genius. Genius. Anyway, so he started Virgin Galactic. Like, how much bigger are you going to get than that? Any competition? Not much. And you've got Elon Musk. This guy is like a personal hero to me. He has a lot of haters. In a group this size, I'm sure there's a few of you that don't like him, and that's fine. For me, it's hard to believe he exists. I honestly can hardly believe. It's like he spends his life doing impossible things. So it's unbelievable. But he obviously, he started SpaceX. By the way, how many of you watched the Falcon Heavy launch? There's 2 of them so far. See, if you're into this, if you're a nerd like me, if you're into this even that much, go to YouTube and search for SpaceX Falcon Heavy launch. I get shivers down my spine when I watch, because what they're doing is insane. They're reusing their rockets. Do you see that? They take the side, they're doing all 3 now. They send the darn thing up, and then they bring the rockets back down and land them like pencils on the same platform that they took off from 11 minutes earlier. How is that possible? It's just, like, the accomplishment of that, just from a physics perspective, is okay. So the cost of sending a rocket to the ISS, right? A Falcon 9 to ISS is International Space Station. The cost of sending a rocket to the ISS is about $60 million. It depends on the weight, cargo. $60 million. How much is the fuel? The whole price tag is $60 million. How much is the fuel? I guessed $10 million. That was my guess, $10 million. You know what the answer is? $200,000. $200,000, 1/300th of the total cost. 1/300. So if you can reuse the hardware, you can bring down the cost function by 100-fold or more. That's disruptive innovation, right? Like, no one else is doing it. I mean, Blue Origin's giving it a go, but they're a little bit behind. Whatever. The bottom line is it's awesome either way, but it's crazy, right? So now their cost structure isn't 60 million, it's probably like 7 million. But what do they charge? They charge 55 million, which is just a little bit less than the competition, so they get the orders, and then they have a ton of profit to do what with? Innovate, and innovate, and innovate more, and innovate more, and innovate more in a way that no one else can afford because they're not reusing the hardware. You see how that works? Like, it's so insane. And the first time they pulled it off was just at the end of 2015, right before Christmas. I was in Florida. And when they pulled it off, their employees partied like it was 1999. Average age 27. Imagine. That makes them millennials. Millennials get a bad rap, don't they? People say they're lazy, apathetic, and entitled. It's not true. It's not true. Those young kids will work harder than anyone you've ever hired if you give them something inspiring to work towards. That's what they want to do. They want to do something cool, right? They want to be part of something neat. They want to change the world, right? Or populate another one, right? I mean, that's, these stories, we've heard these stories a million times before. What do they all have in common? These people thought bigger. They were like, yes, I will do the big thing. I will do the thing that no one else has done before. I will try it, even if it fails, right? So my presentation, in a sense, it's not really about, the work of the future or artificial intelligence. It's about leadership. I mean, this whole thing is about leadership. It's who's going to take a stand and say, yes, I'll do it, right? Who's going to stay on the right side of the leverage equation, right? And just think way, way bigger about what's possible. Next 10 years is going to be nothing like the last 10. Like, we're in uncharted territory. So anyway, like I said, we're going to do some questions now for whatever time we have. Also, I'm going to be back later on. I do have a handful of, I just brought one box of books. This is a book, it's called Anarchy Inc. So for those of you who like $20, I just have a few. I think I have 20. So if any of you would like one, I would love to get you one. But anyway, and I don't know how much time we have. So
Patrick, wasn't this a great talk by Patrick?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah.
So we have